Dear colleagues, I hope you agree that we've had three very fascinating presentations going over similar ground from quite different perspectives. So I open the floor straight away for your interventions. Just ask you to quickly state your name when you ask a question, and do please try and be fairly brief. I know quite a few of you. I'm just going to point to some who I may not know. So is the colleague here first? Those microphones will come around.
Okay, thanks. This is Andrea Roventini from Sant'Anna. Well, I have a question for each of the three speakers. So I would like to start from Miriam Rem. Do you really think that there is a contradiction or a possible problem between mitigation and decoupling? Because I would say that decoupling is a sort of emergent property that you can get if you go for mitigation. So if you go to zero emission, you will see absolute decoupling, and we're already seeing relative decoupling in some country. Well, for Julia Steinberger, I like your point. My question is for you is, don't you think that there could be possible problem just in focusing on reducing consumption, because this could be used in a bad way, so to speak, to overlook the class struggle which is connected to the climate change and which require a very active role of the government? Because then if you say it's just a matter of reducing consumption, this could be used, for instance, even by energy company by saying, well, it's the fault of the people that don't reduce their consumption standard. So it really needs to put these things in with a good communication message, which I think actually you did. And last but not least, to Zsolt Darvas, well, I was a little bit puzzled by some part of your talk. I completely like the conclusion. I was puzzled because you show this emission of Europe and says, well, Europe is not so much responsible now, but if you take the cumulative stock of emission from the Industrial Revolution, Europe has a big chunk, a big responsibility in the current problem, also because climate change has a lot of inertia. So temperature is increasing now for the emission of many decades ago. And last but not those things is, well, I don't think that there are very big financial constraints, because if the problem is just to invest 1% of GDP, and in the 70s, the investment over GDP was much higher, it's not so much complicated to go to 1%. Also because I don't think that we are unsure about the positive effect or the multiplier or the green investment, because this green investment is going to have a very high multiplier. So there is not really a trade-off. It's basically an opportunity to develop new technology and basically to go for a sort of Schumpeterian competition, which basically would solve the problem.
Thank you, Andrea, very much. Please, who would like to take the floor? Let's collect a few questions. Don't be shy, please.
Hi, Paul Agilazaro. A little but important question to Julia. I wanted to know his opinion on the role of money and finance regarding provision system and sufficiency. Thank you.
Anybody else? I see a hand over here, but I'm not sure.
Michael Bassard. Question for Saul. Also, regarding this different shares of contribution to emissions that apparently right now Europe is less, I was wondering how much of the emissions that are emitted elsewhere are because of the goods that Europe and North America are also demanding, and if perhaps if the number is high, that would mean that maybe we should move towards less trade and towards more local production. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dirk Bessemer, you were asking for the floor?
Yes. Is that okay?
Was it Dirk?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Eric Kempenich, Stockholm Environment Institute. Hello, Julia. So I wanted to address your call to action and just raise something on behalf of some of the, especially the young researchers in the room. because I saw a lot of fantastic work here, moving in the direction that you're calling for. But as a realistic thing, I mean, they might put their research out, a policymaker might go, wow, this is really interesting, and then call in their economist, and the economist says, well, I understand their motivations, but it's not micro-founded. That's it. So I guess this is for everyone. Do you have any advice for how the demand for this work could increase, or what people in this room could do to increase the demand for that kind of policy-relevant research? Thank you.
Thank you. Dirk Besson.
Thanks. Dirk Besson, University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I have a question for Saul Darvas. Many thanks for your excellent talk and presentations. You worry about government debt levels, fiscal consolidation, and so you say there needs to be private funding. This is what Daniele Gabor calls the Wall Street consensus. But there are two sources of funds. In today's Guardian, it was said that the G20, since January 2020, the G20 spent 300 billion on fossil fuel taxes. So if we reduce those taxes, that's the first enormous source of revenue. And the second is a wealth tax. There's increasing consensus by Piketty, Saaz, and others that taxing wealth is actually good for the economy, probably. And again, I mean that there's untold billions to be taxed there. So we really have no lack of money. I would really want to contradict that.
So I have Jan Prieber and Ansgar on my list. Will you be fairly brief? Otherwise, I'd say have a second round. But okay, then please be very quick, and then we'll go back to the panel. Otherwise, it's too many questions. But please do be brief, Jan.
I have one. For me, there is one key question where I do not have an answer, to be honest, and I would ask you for help. Look at the numbers. If I'm not, I calculated pretty precise, I think. More than half of all greenhouse gas emissions presently come from the global south, defined as middle-income countries and low-income countries, according to the World Bank classification. A second number, practically all greenhouse gas emissions after 1990 came from the global south. So even if the north would reduce consumption and emissions immensely, so that emissions next year are zero, greenhouse gas emissions next year zero, the south has to reduce the majority of the emissions too. How to do that?
Yes, this is Ansgar Rannberg. I have a question also for Julia Steinberger. You showed this very interesting figure with the share of different income groups in global CO2 emissions. And I'm wondering, this was for the whole world. I think it would be very interesting to see these figures on a country by country basis. Like, for instance, how does it look like in Germany? How does it look like in the United States? I think that would be, and if it looks similar, I mean, that would be very important information for for national debates on how to progress on reducing CO2 emissions and so on.
Okay, so I think we'll go to the panel now. I've noted two colleagues over here. I've noted you, but please, otherwise we'll get a bit lost. I think maybe we'll start with Miriam and do a classic sort of reverse order.
All right. Thanks a lot for the questions. So the first question by Andrea, that was a complete misunderstanding. I do not think that there's a contradiction between mitigation and decoupling. I think there is to some extent a contradiction between mitigation, decoupling, and other actions. Right. So I do think that we need all five, as I said, but I don't see where the contradiction came in. I hope. But it's good that it was cleared up. I think the other question that I can speak to is the one is using micro foundations going to get us approval from mainstream economists and policymakers. And I'm glad that we can speak from experience here. Yeah, we have people at the FMM, post-Keynes and macroeconomists, who've done that, who have found that they have not gained by that on that basis then recognition and acceptance in mainstream economics. So I think the problem runs deeper, and micro foundations is a symptom, not a cause, right? So if you want to, if I were to advise young economists, if they want to have an impact, what I would advise them, rather than to go into DSGE and learn the methods, if you want to go ahead, by all means, right? I mean, always good to have more people doing interesting stuff with a good heart. But what you should be doing is publish your research. Especially climate research is not hard to be published, and you're actually going to have very high impact factors in these more ecology-oriented journals, right? They are better than econ journals because they're closer to the natural sciences, and therefore you will be doing well on the job market, most likely. And then if you want to have an impact with that published paper, go to the press, right? Do blogs, do podcasts, do opinion pieces in newspapers, go on Twitter. That is where the journalists are. Take part in, I mean, it's a time sink and it's a pain, right? But if that's what you want to do, that's I think, how you can, as an individual, make an impact. Thank you.
Is it on? Yeah, thanks. Thanks for all the questions. I'll try to go fast, mainly because I don't have answers, so it makes it easier. So the first question was about the role of reducing consumption as an issue in terms of class struggle, and questioning the role of government in this. So if the role of all governments here is reduce consumption and then they make life miserable for people. So I think one of the things that's really key to understand here is that we need to differentiate between material consumption and the services and well-being that people get. This is going to be educating policymakers, educating the general public, educating ourselves, and that distinction is crucial to enable making pathways visible that allow us to survive the next few decades in more or less decent shape. So this idea that just material consumption is the same as living standards really needs to be broken up and questioned. That's one point. And I think the other one is that we really need to put well-being and need satisfaction at the center here. And need satisfaction is a very strong sustainability perspective. It means that nobody gets left behind. Nobody is allowed to fall below basic standards on any one of these core dimensions. And it really makes a big difference. It would make a difference in Germany, it would make a difference in England, all over the world in terms of what that means for social policy. So I think that that's also something to consider. Which links to the second question, the role of money and finance and sufficiency. I don't know. I'm trained as a physicist. You guys work on this. This is your job. No, I'm serious. Do it. It really needs doing. But, I mean, you can't, yeah. But I think that part of answering that, which is going to be really important, is one of the aspects that Miriam was talking about, removing sectors and removing the foundational elements of our economy from the profit motive. I think that's going to be really important, a really important aspect of that. So treating the economy as an assemblage of provisioning systems, where each provisioning system might need a different configuration of money finance, including the welfare state. So we could think about things like universal basic services, universal basic income, what those mean as well. I didn't quite understand the question on trade, so I'm sorry about that. So maybe let's make sure to connect later. But I do think that just one thing that in terms of trade relations that we often forget is that we still get net wealth flows from the global south to the global north. Not just resource flows, wealth flows, right? So a wealth tax on wealthy people all over the world is a climate mitigation policy. We should send billionaires into the sun. All of them, no exceptions. And also, we should abolish the global debt in terms of the debt between North and South, because that debt is one of the main things that's preventing countries in the global south from escaping extractivism and carbon-intensive traps, as well as keeping people in poverty. In terms of what young researchers and how we can support them, I think this is really, really important. And all the things that Miriam said are really important in terms of bolstering people's careers. I think there's also a community level. We should learn from organizing. We can organize to make sure that policymakers understand that Europe, that the world needs new economic models. So this is something where this community can sign statements saying, you can't have micro-based research. This is a death trap. Stop it, okay? So we need to change the policies that we run our economies on. This is something where this community can help, can sort of support the work of young researchers, hopefully. So it's not just an individual problem, but a collective one. I'm not quite sure I agree with the numbers that were discussed in the next question around sort of have the emissions come from the global south after 1990. I don't think that's completely right, but we can check that. But the main point that the global south also needs to reduce emissions is absolutely correct. We all need to reduce emissions. We're all stuck, right? So we all need to escape from that. And what that means is it's a challenge, is we need the framework conditions that allow that to happen while protecting people. So what we showed in terms of the decent living energy scenario, and there's others that have come out since, including work by Kickstra et al., shows that this is possible. So global south countries can provide decent living standards for their entire population, alleviating material poverty completely at lower energy use, entirely attainable by production through renewable energy. That's not a problem. The problem is, how does one get to the investment and the distribution and the political economy that would allow that to happen? The share in income groups, country by country, that can be done. I think it is interesting. One of the things to understand is that the people here who are not in the top 1% are probably in the top 10% globally. So it is us in terms of like some of the demographics. I hear some of you flew here. What are you doing? Like, it's 2021, stop flying to conferences. Really, I'm serious. So we also need to think about how we represent what we're doing. Thank you so much.
So is it on? Okay. So thank you for the question. There were 2 points, two questions on European emissions, and both are right. I mean, I think I also said that currently Europe emissions is relatively small in the global emissions, around 10%. But the point that in the past Europe had a much greater role is fully correct. Also correct that now we are importing, or we have exported a lot of dirty activities outside Europe and now importing the goods. So emission happens elsewhere. I mean, that's the reason why the Commission and some member states are very keen on introducing a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, the Commission made a proposal some weeks, months ago, which would initially start from some specific items like cement, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, and energy, and things like that, and it would be very gradual. So maybe it's too slow and not enough. As I follow those debates, I think it's very difficult to introduce. I'm very much in favor of introducing such a mechanism, which basically would avoid the problem that you mentioned. Let's see if politics in Europe will allow to do that faster. Another issue, there were also 2 comments on whether there are financial constraints, lack of money or not, and with different arguments. One argument was that green investments have very high multiplier, and the Schumpeterian process will actually generate growth and a lot of employment elsewhere. I would be much more nuanced on that view, I have to say, because at the same time, you know, you have to close very many dirty activities. Many people are working on dirty activities, even if they are not responsible for, I mean, they are not the owners of the companies, they are working there, they will lose their jobs. Now, whether all the new green things will be able to employ all of these people and retrain them to be there, I mean, I'm not that sure. And also, if you look at scenarios, I mean, even the Commission in its Green Deal projections made a number of scenarios, and there are scenarios which the overall Green Deal has a negative growth impact. So so I'm less sure that it's that clear cut that with the green transition we will have much faster growth and more tax revenues that we can spend on financing green investments. I would be much more cautious on that. And on the colleague from the Netherlands, yes, I mean you can tax fuel, you can introduce a wealth tax. Why it's not happening? I mean, why it's not happening, and how much time will it take to make that happen? I mean, there is no general discussion on wealth taxes in Europe. There are different types of wealth taxes, property taxes, capital gains taxes, and so on. I mean, in some countries like France, these account for about 4% of total revenues. In Eastern Europe, it's account for less than 1%. So it's a huge diversity within Europe on the role of wealth type taxes. But there is no discussion at all of introducing a general wealth tax, or even just for the super rich, like Gabriel Zuckman and some other propose. So I think in this decade, it's basically almost 100% or 99.9% likely that there will be not much more tax revenues from wealth taxes. But we need to do investment right now, starting from today. And from 2023, fiscal rules will kick in. Countries will have to do fiscal consolidations. And as I showed and argued, fiscal consolidations in the past always coincided with cuts in public investment. But now we not just need to maintain public investment, but in fact a massive increase in public investment. And I think it's simply not happen. And this around the corner, 2023 is a bit more than a year from now. I'm afraid we will not have new big taxes to finance that revenue. So again, I think something needs to be done with fiscal rules, because otherwise I'm afraid we will lose again many years, and maybe 5 or 8 years from now, governments will realize that, oops, we missed an opportunity, we didn't invest enough, emissions again growing too fast and not reduced at an appropriate pace. So maybe 5, 8, 10 years from now, more serious actions will be done. But I think we need to act now to prevent that happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. We have time for a quick round. I have to be a bit ruthless about the time, so I'm not now going to look to the right and left. I saw in this central block there were a number of people who raised their hands. So I would tell you, I would ask you to be very quick with your questions. So I saw Isabel Weber. I saw the lady here with the blue. Then afterwards, perhaps. Antoine, you wanted the floor, and then the gentleman with his hand raised. In that order, please. But do try and be quick. Thank you.
Yeah, so there seems to be this implicit opposition between growth and degrowth. But if I look at Julia Steinberger's levels of average consumption, and I look at the levels of consumption for the majority of people on this planet, it seems that for a very large number of people, it would still be a growth in their consumption. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts on this observation. My second question is, thank you very much for really doing a great job in bringing these paradigms together, Miriam, and I'm wondering whether the history of economic thought might have something to contribute to kind of connecting post-Keynesian thought to more holistic ways of thinking about transitions. After the Second World War, there was a question whether to use the war economy for a social needs-oriented new kind of economic model, or whether to continue with kind of a war industrial complex. I'm wondering whether the history of economic thought in that sense might have an unlikely role to play in helping post-Keynesian economics. Well, shut up here.
Thank you, Isabella. I'm not sure. Do you have who has the microphone now? But then the lady here.
Elena Hofferbath. So thank you for all your 3 presentations. And I think one outcome that I look at in my research, and that I think I also see represented in your presentations, is that actually there is a problem with our economic system. And I'm wondering about your thoughts about rethinking the system, and maybe, really think at solutions to the ecological and social crisis at a systemic level, like avenues that you see as ways forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Antoine Godin.
Thank you. Antoine Godin, French Agency for Development. I think all 3 presenters are showing that there are some inherent constraints to the existing system that prevents the emergence of all of the different policies that you were recommending. So in the end, we always end up in the second best options. So the question is then, how do we change the system? And if you look at the different crises we've had in the last 20 years, 2007 great financial crisis, the 2019, 2020 COVID crisis, there hasn't been change. I mean, we got massive slaps in the face, and yet we get back where we were. So the question is, okay, how do we move that? And how do you actually change people's behavior? And I haven't heard an answer to that. So I'm sorry, but I'd like to have more thoughts on this. Thanks.
So you, please, yes. And then we have to stop, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Raphael Wilder from University of Greenwich. I must come back to the issue of multipliers. So the question goes to Saul Darvas, because I'm very surprised that you are really questioning the growth effects of public investment. I mean, there's a huge literature which is clear that public investment multipliers are extremely high. I mean, we have estimates in literature about 2, 3. That was before we hit the whole weak recovery, zero lower bound situation. Colleagues and myself have just published a study on Monday. We estimate government investment multipliers for the EU27. We find multipliers between 4 and 5. I can send you that paper if you're interested. I don't want to kind of pick a specific number or argue that this is the number of the multiplier. I think the general picture is they're probably quite large. Government investment multipliers are probably quite large, and I think it's pretty clear that we don't need to worry about debt to GDP increases if we invest as governments, and then I don't understand why don't we say that. I think there's a last thought. There's a concern or a problem. We mustn't self-censor about what we write or say as researchers and as think tankers about based on what we think is politically feasible. I think this is really potentially dangerous and not doing our duty to inform the political process. So maybe you can just tell me again why are you so concerned about the rising debt of public investment? I think it's not consistent with the empirical evidence we have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So thanks. I'm sorry, I have to stop really now. Otherwise, we're going to be late for dinner. So let's go back to the original order. If each of you could just pick up on one or two questions and then make maybe a concluding sentence or two, then we'll have to wrap up.
Now let me start on the multiplier issue. Well, 4 to 5 is a nice number. I think many governments would be very, very happy with that. But coming to the substance, so I would differentiate between climate-related public investments and a general public investment like building a road or something like that, some simple things. Because for the climate, that simultaneously creates something, but at the same time, for the climate transition, we have to close dirty activities. So yes, you can build, a wind farm, super good. It will need a lot of steel and cables and something like that. But at the same time, you have to close, let's say gas turbines or things like that. So the two things will have to go in parallel. And I can also send you papers which really question whether green growth or the green transition will indeed improve economic growth or not. And many papers conclude the opposite. I mean, as I said, the Commission made a lot of scenarios for what the impact of the green transition is going to be on the economy, and the number of scenarios shows it would have a negative impact. So if we accumulate more debt, but the economy is in fact will be worse with the green transition than it would be without that, then in countries which have already high public debts, I'm afraid the public debt problem can indeed come to the surface, and those countries might face difficulties.
Do you want to make a concluding statement, a general statement? I think, okay, Julia.
Is it on? Yeah, thank you. There was a question on growth versus degrowth. The levels of consumption, so basically if we give everybody access to equitable, sufficient energy services, some people's consumption will grow. And that's totally, totally true. Again, not as many as you might think, because we're actually, one of the things to understand is that fossil fuels are massively inefficient. Whether you use them in internal combustion engines or to generate electricity, you use you lose 2/3 of the primary energy on the way to getting useful energy. And other people in this room probably know more about this than I do even. But so one of the things you're doing is you're making your system much more efficient on this way to sufficiency. So you can do a lot more with levels of energy use that currently correspond to like really poverty deprivation levels. But if you provide the right framework conditions, the right infrastructure, the right technology, and those work out much better. So yes, a lot of people will face growth in consumption, and that's necessary and good, but maybe not as much as you might think. History of economic thought, I think, is very important, and I learn a lot every time I try to learn about that and go to a talk about that. So I think we do need to learn about how to reawaken our imagination and go back to being, asking really big questions. I think that's probably important. Elena's question on trying to rethink systems and systemic change. Yes, although I think that one of the things we're seeing is that a lot of the models we might have and the new system configurations we might have, such as Miriam was showing, make that transformation possible. Like, it is possible to imagine these alternatives and even to model them, even if they don't necessarily result in economic growth. In some cases, that doesn't necessarily mean social disaster, right? The question, I think, maybe that's more relevant is how do we rethink that system in order to answer the second question, or the third question that was after that, which is I'm going to rephrase it, which is how do we win? How do we go from understanding that we need systemic change to getting it? And in terms of how do we win, I don't know, because we're not doing a lot of winning, as Miriam pointed out. But how do we get there? It's certainly by being a heck of a lot more brave and by not moving away from political organizing. So the way you win. This is not a tea salon. This is not like we all sit down and eat crumpets and drink cups of tea and whoever has the best argument wins. This is a fight to the death by massive industries who are really good at lying. And they really don't care about destroying their opponents. They have caused climate scientists, like this, these are industries who hired people to make death threats against climate scientists, right? They are not nice people. We win by fighting them and winning. We have to go up, we have to understand who the enemy is, we have to understand what we're up against. It's not, it is about economic structure, it is about power, and it's about specific industries that need to be turned off and who that corresponds to. So I think that we need to be realistic. At least one of the ways we start to win is by being realistic about who we're up against and not moving away from that fight, not trying to be polite about it. I would certainly encourage that. Otherwise, I have no idea. And I have no concluding statement.
All right, I'll try to be as brief as I can. So regarding the multiplier discussion, first of all, either you're looking at individual measures, right? Then I think the literature is pretty clear, especially the recent one, that these are pretty high. Or you're looking at the entirety of measures. Then the question is, what are you comparing it to? And the business as usual scenarios I try to argue completely underestimates, due to neoclassical economics, the harms of climate change. So you're having a huge issue in modeling, leading to a misunderestimation of the effects. Now, so the other point that I wanted to say something about is wealth taxes. Again, the power issue there is rampant. Why are we not getting them? It's pretty clear. It's a pure political power issue. We have the economic theory behind us, and it's not the post-Keynesian, it's a neoclassical by now, right? This is standard economics, and we have popular support. There is supermajorities in favor of wealth taxes. It is not a democratic issue. It's a political power issue. The degrowth debate. I see that as a dead end, actually. I think it's an infight among the left that is not helping us. Growth is an accounting identity measured ex post. it is not a goal in itself. It's a means to an end at the most. And so what we need to focus on is the goals that we want to look at and what we want to reach and how we want to live in our societies. And then we need to talk about work time, we need to talk about public systems, we need to talk about how we want to organize our lives as societies. So whether that then in the end leads to growth or degrowth, we will measure ex post, but I don't think that this should be a goal that we are fighting over upfront. Regarding coming back to the debt questions, I am still hopeful, in contrast to Antoine, that we might not make the same mistakes again as after 2007, 2008. The debate, I hope, and that's what I see in the fiscal councils that I sit in and what I hear from other people on fiscal councils, the debate is still open whether we are going to have a disastrous austerity turn again as we did in 2009, where Europe drove itself into a double dip through austerity. And I'm not yet convinced that this fight is lost yet. Right? The debate is ramping up, and we're hearing the statements. We need to say we need austerity as a base premise. But I think Adam Toozy and others have done a lot of work convincing policymakers and convincing also experts at the European level that this is not strictly necessary, and that we have a fundamental flaw, as it was also pointed out in our measuring, even in the economic theory, in the measuring and so I still think that there's hope with that respect. And I'm banking on the ecological economics side to support us in averting austerity, because that is not the kind of degrowth that we need. This kind of is a poverty trap for many people, and it's not useful. Thank you so much for the history of economic thought question. I think the war economy is not. I mean, it's not how I would put it to policymakers, right? But I think thinking how we can provide well for people in a good way is what we need to think about. How we want to live, how we can reduce work time, how we can change things. And I think as economists, input-output analysis is going to be crucial, and that was the finding from the last World War, that this is how we are able to understand how our system functions and are able to intervene at certain points. So I've long thought that it's abysmal that we have nothing to say on a COVID-19 economy. Nobody. There's research, tons of research, and we still don't know which sectors we can close down and which people are going to be affected by that. Who are the essential workers? And this, I think, is what we need to work on, because it's going to be the same question that we're going to have with climate change. So I really think that this is a research paradigm that I would be super interested in working on, because that's what we're going to need to be able to answer in the future, I believe. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Miriam. A nice way to end the presentation. Thank you to all the presenters, and I'm sure that applause was applying to you all. We could go on and debate these issues, I'm sure, a lot longer. We have an opportunity now at dinner to do so also, and I invite you all to come to dinner. I have to make a few housekeeping announcements, as you can imagine. Those of you who come every year will know. I'll try and be brief. I mean, I hope you agree we've had a successful conference. It's been nice to see some friends and colleagues in person again. For me, this was certainly the first time in really many months, and I'm sure for you. I would like to greet the people watching on the live stream also, and hope that maybe you can come back to Berlin next year. So organizing this year's conference was quite a challenge, as you can imagine, because of all the restrictions, and we had some people who weren't able to come. So I'd like to start by thanking the people who were in the smaller organizing committee of this specific conference. So Maria Nicolaidi, Sebastian Gechert, Jan Beringer, and myself were the people on the scientific committee organizing it. We're backed by a super team at the IMK and the HBS. Some of the colleagues have just entered the room now. You've been interacting with them also in person now here and by email in some cases on travel arrangements. Thank you very much for that applause, Sabina, Svenja, Katharina, and the colleagues from the organization department. It's been really quite a challenge this year, as you can imagine. Let me just give a shout out to use modern parlance to Jeremiah Nollenberg. I'm not sure, I don't see him now in the room. He's helped us here for the last 2 years organizing the conference. This is moving on now from the IMK to greater things in Cologne. Germans in the audience will know that Düsseldorf and Cologne have a certain rivalry, so Jeremiah is leaving us for Cologne. But all the best to you there, Jeremiah, and thanks for your... So, very briefly, also thank you now to the technical team colleagues. There's a live stream, but these videos will also be available online. We'll have a documentation of the conference made available later. This is unfortunately unfortunately the last time we will be able to meet in this hotel, almost certainly. So the future of the hotel has been under so Damocles Schwert for quite some time now. We've been able to come back this year, so I particularly like to ask for your applause for the hotel staff who look after us very well every year. So it's very easy to remember the dates of the next conference. So it's between the 20th and the 22nd of 2022. So you don't even need to write it down, right? It's really quite easy to remember. It'll be in a different conference hotel, but also in Berlin. One last point: it's the time for the clocks to change here. So you have also an extra hour in bed tomorrow, or you have to get up less early if you have an early trip tomorrow. You have an extra hour to sleep off, maybe also some beer or some wine, to which we now invite you in the restaurant just around the corner. So thank you very much.